Good evening, and welcome to the Harbor Springs Festival of the Book virtual event with Kevin Wilson and Brock Clarke. I'm Maureen Abood, and it's my honor as chair of the festival board to welcome you. On behalf of the entire festival team, we're grateful to have you with us tonight. We also thank the Michigan Council for Arts and Cultural Affairs for their support of tonight's event. Your support and your presence with us makes the festival world go round. And we want you to know that we're in continuous discussion about the possibilities for our signature event in September of this year. We're really hopeful about what's going to be possible, and we'll be keeping you posted. You can be sure of that. For the order of events tonight, we first heard a lovely musical introduction by musician Owen James. Thank you so much, Owen. Next, we'll enjoy a stimulating conversation with Kevin Wilson and Brock Clarke on Kevin's best-selling novel, Nothing to See Here. And what a book it is. After that, we're going to open it up to your questions, so you can use the chat box to write your questions, and we'll get to as many of those as we possibly can in the hour that we have. The festival is delighted to welcome back Brock Clarke. He was a presenter at our 2019 festival on his book, Who Are You, Calvin Bledsoe? He was on 2 dynamic panels at that festival. He's an award-winning author, and he's written 8 works of fiction and numerous stories. Brock is currently the A. Leroy Greason Professor of English and Chair of the English Department at Bowdoin College. His new book, I Grape, or The Case for Fiction, will be out on March 15th. So Brock, we're going to keep an eye out for your new book. Looking forward to that. And now, welcome, Kevin Wilson in conversation with Brock Clarke.
Here we are. So I just want to note, first of all, that Kevin and I were in the same shirt. Kevin threatened to change his shirt, but then, he thought better of it. He only had a Spuds MacKenzie shirt in his office, and I wanted to see that, but he said no. All right, so before we get into it, I just want to say it's true. Thank you for having both of us. Thank you for having me back. I was in Harbor Springs in fall 2019, and never been to that far north in Michigan. And I'm not sure, Kevin, if you're like this, but for me, I love to look at maps, and that part of Michigan is like a spectacular part of the map to look at. It just sort of sticks up into the nowhere that's close to Canada. And so I was really happy about that. And then I got there, and sort of beautiful fall weather. I had no idea what to expect. It's a beautiful place right on the lake. And I was touring behind this book. Kevin and I give a reading for this book. It's about people who are crazy about and made crazy by John Calvin, the Protestant theologian. So I never know what the fuck is going to happen with that book. Like, I have no idea what anyone's going to think. And I did these 3 panels, actually. Maureen said 2, but I did a 3rd one. And people were, the most enthusiastic response I got for the book was there. And I think it's part because it's Calvin country, which I didn't really think about till I got there. And so people are just crazy about John Calvin there, but they're also really crazy about books and writers. And so I was grateful for that. So thank you to Maureen and Amy. I'm going to do, Kevin, a little introduction for you, and then we're going to get going. And I read it because I get flustered otherwise, and I'll just say things like, I love you, man, and that'll get awkward on camera. Kevin Wilson is the author of 2 collections, Tunneling to the Center of the Earth and Baby, You're Going to Be Mine, and 3 novels, The Family Thing, Perfect Little World, and most recently, in 2019, the New York Times bestseller, Nothing to See Here. His fiction has appeared in Plowshares, Tin House, One Story, A Public Space, and Elsewhere, and has appeared in 4 volumes of the New Stories from the South, and as well as the Penn O. Henry Prize Stories. He's received fellowships from MacDowell Colony, Yaddo, Rivendell, and the KHN Center for the Arts, and has won an Alex Award from the American Library Association and a Shirley Jackson Award. He lives in Sewanee, Tennessee, where he's the associate professor in the English department at Sewanee University of the South. I'm sure you'd rather hear Kevin talk about his great work rather than me talk about how great it is. And so I'm going to get out of the way. But before I do, I want to say that his work is great, and that's been clear from the very beginning. When I was the editor of Cincinnati Review, I published one of Kevin's early stories, Grand Stand-In. Do you remember this, Kevin? Yeah, and narrated by a woman who rents herself out as a grandmother to families who need one. What I love about that story is what I love about all Kevin's work. It is funny, it is odd, it treats its oddity intelligently, but wears it lightly, and it is moving, unnervingly so. We begin a Kevin Wilson novel, a Kevin Wilson story, full of delight at the premise, and we end full of wonder at how he's made the premise move us. He and I have given a bunch of readings over the year together, so I'm pleased to get to talk to him tonight about Nothing to See Here. Hey, Kevin.
Oh, that was wonderful. Thanks, Brock.
I don't think I've ever, so we've done these things before and I've published your work, but I don't think I've ever got to introduce you. So that's, another thing off the bucket list. Did you have dinner yet tonight?
No.
What's on tap once you do have it?
I don't know. What I've been eating for the last hour is one of my wife's friends made a failed batch of fudge. So it's just a big tub of crystallized sugar and pecans. And so I've been eating that like with my hands to get myself ready for this event.
Sounds great.
Yeah. I'm good to go.
Yeah, right, good. Do you mind talking a little bit about even like a plot summary of Nothing to See Here? I've got a bunch of questions, but maybe it'd be good to preface it with that.
Yeah, no, of course. So the book Nothing to See Here really follows a woman in her late 20s, early 30s, Lillian, who's kind of came from difficult circumstances, but showed a lot of promise, and nothing really worked out for her. She has a best friend that she met at this boarding school, Madison, and things absolutely did work out for her. And they've stayed in touch, but not really seen each other until Madison reveals that she has a job for Lillian and would like her to come to this huge estate where Madison lives with her husband, who's a politician, a senator, possibly destined for bigger things. And Lillian learns that she's going to be the nanny for two 10-year-old twins who periodically burst into flames. And then the story goes, it's one summer with this small little cast of characters.
Yeah, so so it's funny because I heard you talk about this book before, and it still is interesting to me how simple you make it sound. Like, of course, that's what you would do. And you would need help taking care of these children if you had children like these. How did you come up with the idea itself? And even like if the idea came to you in stages or whatever, I'd love to hear about it.
Yeah, I mean, so it's one of those things where since I was little, I've loved spontaneous human combustion. I've been obsessed with it. Those time life mysteries of the unknown books that you buy on TV, and there was there'd be one little page about spontaneous human combustion, and it just really, for whatever reason, just set up shop in my brain. And as a kid, I was terrified that it might happen. I have all this agitation in my body always since I was very young, just always been anxious. And so I was afraid I might. And then probably in high school, when really I started to lose it a little, I was like, oh, I wish I could burst into flames because it would like burn everything out. I'd be clean, ready to go. And it was really attractive to me. And then in my, 30s, I got diagnosed with Tourette's, and that kind of made some sense to me. Like, it helped me get a sense of why I have these tics and this agitation and why that felt like combustion was possible. And so that first collection of stories I wrote, Telling the Center of the Earth, there's a story where the main character's parents spontaneously combusted. That's right. And I was like, okay, I mean, that's why I write, right? Just to try to deal with these obsessions, like to try to figure them out. And I was like, well, I'm done with spontaneous human combustion. That's good. And then I wrote my first novel, and I was like, I think I want to write a little thing about spontaneous human combustion. So the main character gets a job. She's an actress. She's going to be the governess to these children who burst into flames. And I thought, that's good. I'm done. And it's one of those things, like with your first novel, you're like, I may never write another book, so I'm going to put everything I can possibly put into it. And I immediately was like, oh, I want that back. I need it. And so I've kind of set up shop. Now, 3 of my 5 books have spontaneous human combustion. So that's my lane. It's a pretty wide open
That's right.
lane. So that's my thing.
Yeah, you're the only car in that lane.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so then with this book, though, that stuff was when I didn't have kids. I was writing about what it would mean to burn up, and that was me. It was what would I do? And that was fine. Like, I figured out how to take care of myself. And then we had kids, and Brock and I both have kids, and uh immediately, I knew, oh, this is different. It's different than trying to keep yourself from bursting into flames. And my son Griff, very young age, exhibited those same tics. And the pediatrician was like, it could be Tourette's. It really could be. It's too early to tell. And I immediately felt this kind of intense guilt, like, oh, genetically, I've passed this on. What have I done? And so I just started thinking, like, I know how to protect myself if I burst into flames, but how do you protect people that you love? Like, what can you do? It's impossible in some ways. So the book was just me trying to figure that out. Like, how do you take care of people who burst into flames? And there's a moment in the novel pretty early on where Lillian just makes a list. She's like, you would use stuntman gel, you would use Nomex, you would do transcendental meditation or yoga, cognitive behavior. And that's really how the book kind of started. Was I was just in my head, I was like, how would you? When you're a parent, everything's practical. Like, you just have to make a list and move forward. So that's really when I knew that this was what I wanted the book to be.
And that's actually one of the things I love about both the book and also Lillian, is the sort of matter-of-fact, sort of practical way. Like, what would you do if you had to take care of children who burst into flames when they were agitated? So I'm wondering if that was, I have a bunch of questions about Lillian, but I'm wondering if that was something you struck on really early, is that I'm going to have your narrator approach this in a kind of practical way, and not in as, and oh my fucking God, these kids are bursting into flames. Because there are a couple of things that I love about her. Can I point them out, Kevin? And then I'd love to hear you talk about this. Because so many writers, you and I teach, and so I'm not sure about your students, but sometimes my students, when they're dealing with fantastical premises, they want to make a big deal about pointing out how fantastical they are. Like, oh, wow, someone's bursting into flames. And it's usually death to the story. But you do this thing, or you have Lillian do this thing. This is when her friend Madison basically is not yet told her, but sort of preparing to. And she's like, this is Lillian talking. Madison, are they like mole people or something? What's wrong with them? I wanted so badly for something to be wrong with them. I wanted them to be mutants. And then the next one is, I think, a couple pages later, where Lillian said, after Madison explains what's wrong with the kids, I was in shock, but the images felt easy in my brain, honestly. Children made of fire. That seemed like something I wanted to see. And that's, for me, that just sort of diffuse any tendency toward hyperbole or overreaction that just undercuts it. I'm just wondering, like, whether that became obvious to you as the best approach, or whether you had to like experiment with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, some of the first times when I was really introduced in college to magical realism, like Garcia Marquez or Milhauser, what I loved about it was just like everyone in the story is kind of bored and a little irritated with magic. You know what I mean? Like, the woman ascends, they're all washing their clothes in the river, and the woman ascends into heaven, and they're like, oh, we got to do her laundry. You know what I mean? Like, I like that stuff. And partly it's because, and Brock, you and I did an event in New York where we were to promote the book, and it was like this huge People magazine event. And I think both of us could not have been more unhappy, like trying to navigate it. The world is really terrifying to me. Like, everything feels really strange to me. And so the only way, because I never know what really is and what really isn't strange, and I have to compose myself. So in all situations, I'm working really hard to be like, oh yes, this is how adults live. Obviously, this is normal. No one else is reacting. And so that's just kind of how I navigate the world, is to never freak out externally and just pretend like, oh yeah, this is all just the way people get by. And so with Lillian, that felt natural to me. Like sometimes weirdness is so strange that there's nothing to do but like walk right into it.
Yeah, like accept it. Like accept
Yeah.
that this is the fact of the world or the fact of the book.
Yeah, and the more that you downplay, the more that the weirder the event, you've got to play it down just to balance it out, or else the reader's only thinking about that weird thing, and you can't do any of the other stuff you want to do. And I like weirdness in magic, but I'm using it to try to, move the story along, to do something.
Yeah, and you've already talked about this, but that the title seems perfectly suited to the book. Like when you say nothing to see here, that's really, the story's not about the bursting into flames. It's about, well, shit, how is this family going to hang together?
Well, I think you've touched on something that because it's an interesting story about the title, because my title, and also I've never the title that I've chosen for any of my books has never actually been the title that it goes out with. I'm so bad.
Oh.
Never. And so for this one, all along, the title of the novel was Children on Fire. And the book got accepted. I worked with the editor. And when it got forward, they were like, we can't actually call this book Children on Fire. That is bad. And I was like, okay. And I knew that it might not go just because they'd never. And so I said, what if it's Children Made of Fire? And they were like, no, Kevin, like, the children in the fire, like no matter what you put in between, that's the problem. And so we tried forever to think of a title. So it was my agent, my editor, and me, and we just spent a week. And my agent is Julie Bearer, who I love, and her husband is Colson Whitehead. And she was telling Colson, we can't think of a title, nothing's working. And he was like, you should call it Nothing to See Here. And, Pulitzer Prize winning MacArthur genius Colson Whitehead, everybody loved that title.
Yeah.
And I was jazzed about it, but I did circle back. I was like, we definitely don't want Children on Fire. And so Colson gets all the credit for that title.
Yeah, and perversely, I think Children on Fire is perfect. Like that it's a great time. I mean, I get why they wouldn't want it, but people have all sorts of bad ideas in publishing. And
but they also, like, for the cover, they were like, we can't have the kid on fire. And I was like, oh, and then finally they did. And I was so happy. I was like, thank you for giving me the child on fire.
So this is a dumb question, but Family Fang wasn't the original title for that book?
The title of Family Fang was just Fangs. No exclamation point, but just Fangs. And they were like, that sounds like a vampire or a werewolf.
Yeah. They were right about that one.
Yeah. I'm just not good at it.
I had a book called Exley, and it's a dull title, and I was perfectly willing to come up with alternatives or listen to theirs, but there was all like Return of Exley or Exley Come Home. I was like, you're just putting words next to Exley. Like, you're not, why don't you just call it Sexley? And that's when we stop the conversation anymore. So dude, I'd love to talk about, well, actually, since we've talked about your other books a little bit, so do your books, when you're writing the next book, are you thinking about the previous one at all? Like, are you thinking, because there are themes in common for all our books, and certainly mine, certainly yours, but they seem distinct to me. And are you thinking, oh, I did this in the last book, I want to do something substantially different? So the previous book is about basically a kind of like social experiment, although a much different one than the one of Family Fang. And they're much different books, I think. Did you think after Perfect Little World, you're like, no, I'm going to do something different? Or are you just dumb to that? Are you just like, I'm not thinking about it at all?
No, I am, because you live with a book for so long, you know that it's going to be a big part of your life. So you can't help but think about the previous experience and what you were doing. And I mean, I think I write about just a couple of things, like I have a few things that I care about. And one of them is it's mostly domestic stuff. Like, what does it mean to make a family? What does it mean to be connected to other people? I'm interested in art. That's probably the three things I write about. And so, but it is, to my mind, it's a progression. Like, Family Fang is, what does it mean to be the children? What does it mean to be made by someone? And then Perfect Little World is, what does it mean to make someone? What does it mean to actually give birth to a thing and take care of it? And then this book is that next progression. It's you've made the thing, but how do you keep it safe in the world as it navigates that space? So I think I'm and it's mirroring my own life, right? So, I mean, eventually, I think my next novel will be, well, I know what it is. It's about reaching a point in your life where you start to realize how instrumental the past was. It's all about just looking back at the past, which is what I'm doing now. And then I think the next book will be, what is it like when your children leave you and never talk to you again? And that'll be the next book, and I'll just keep moving through those cycles.
Yeah, at this weird moment, and I actually, Kevin, I'm going to ask you in a second to read a little bit from the book, but I just had this weird moment before we zoomed in. I had this like extended family Zoom call, and I have a son in college who I talk to on the phone regularly. I don't ever Zoom because it's just not the thing I want to do. But then I was on there, and all of a sudden his face appeared, and I was like, oh, man, I miss you. Like, it was a weird moment where these things somehow cycle through. You're talking about that, I think, and that's exactly what your books do, is that you're sort of reminded how family sort of shifts over the course of several books. Yeah. Could you read a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I have to find the book. It's right here. Okay.
That was the least convincing improvisation ever. Wow, I wish I had. Oh, there they are.
Yeah, I've got it. That's why I sat next to all my books. I grabbed this is the Portuguese version, though.
If you could do that, then
yeah, I can read something. I'm happy to read something. Let's see. I think I'll do that thing that we were just talking about. Is that okay, or did you have something in mind?
No, whatever you want.
Okay, so let me all right. So I'm going to read that thing. Right here. Okay. So this is Lillian and Madison are meeting for the first time face to face in years. They haven't seen each other since high school. And all Lillian knows is that Madison has a job for her. And Madison's husband is a senator who has been previously married and has 2 children from a previous marriage. So here it goes. You said there was an opportunity for me? I continued, like a job, maybe? Well, I thought of you because, Lillian, this is honestly very private, what I'm about to tell you. Regardless of what you decide to do, I needed someone who could be discreet, who knew how to keep a secret. I can be discreet, I said. I loved this stuff, bad stuff. I know, she said. Is everything okay? I asked. Yes and no, she said. Yes and no. Did I ever tell you about Jasper's first family? And I'll move forward to this little thing where she talks about him. He ended up marrying Jane, who was the youngest daughter of a really powerful man in Tennessee politics. Jane was strange. She had darkness inside of her. But not to speak ill of my husband, it was politically advantageous to be married to her. She knew the world he moved in and could do the things that he needed done. And they had twins, a girl and a boy, and that was their life, until he met this horsewoman and everything went bad. But then you met him, I offered. It all worked out. She didn't even smile. She was in this now. She was doing it. It did. We had Timothy. I get to be involved in politics. It's nice. Jasper listens to me. Honestly, policy kind of bores him. He likes the fame. He's not big on laws. Anyway, things were fine. What happened? Okay, well, Jane died. She died a few months ago. I'm sorry, I said. It's tragic. And she never really recovered from the divorce. She had always been so brittle, so strange. She went a little crazy. What happened to her? Well, here's what I need to tell you, okay, Lillian? Here's where I need you to promise to keep a secret. Okay, I said, growing a little irritated. I'd already said I'd keep the fucking secret. I needed the secret. I needed to eat it for it to live inside me. Now that Jane's passed away, there is the matter of Jasper's children. They're 10, twins, Bessie and Roland. Sweet kids. Oh, shit, no, I don't know why I said that. I don't know them. But, they're kids. And now, well, they're Jasper's kids. They're his responsibility. And so we're making adjustments to accommodate them. Wait, I asked, you never met your husband's kids? Has he seen them? Lillian, please, can we not focus on this? Are they not already here? And so I'll skip forward. What do you want me to do? I want you to take care of them, Madison said. Like a nanny? Like a nanny, I guess. Okay. I thought maybe more like a governess, like more old-fashioned. Well, how is it different? I think it's mostly just the way it sounds. Really, though, you'd handle all aspects of their care. and then I'll skip to this, which is the ending. Lillian, there's more. What? The kids, Bessie and Roland. I had a quick flash of what might come. It was sexual, some kind of abuse. That notion transformed in some kind of disability, missing limbs, horrific facial scars, a sensitivity to sunlight, a mouth without any teeth at all. Of course, Madison would wait until I'd given myself to her. They have a unique, I don't know what to call it, kind of affliction. Do they not have teeth? I asked. Did they kill a kitten? What? No, just listen to me. They have this affliction where they get really overheated. Oh, okay, I said. They were delicate little kids, fine. Their bodies, for some reason, can quickly rise in temperature, alarming increases in temperature. Okay. They catch on fire. They can rarely, of course, burst into flames. Are you joking? I asked. No, God, of course not, Lillian. Why would I joke? Well, because I never heard of anything like this, because it seems like a joke. Well, it's not a joke. It's serious. I haven't seen it, but Jasper has. The kids get really hot. They catch on fire. I was in shock, but the images felt easy in my brain. Children made of fire. That seemed like something I wanted to see.
That's great. That's great. I do love Lillian in all sorts of ways. I'm wondering if you could talk to us about your sense of her, like how you made her. It's a weirdly Frankensteinish way of talking about it.
But no.
Yeah, but that's kind of how I think about fiction anyways, is that, you know, you have an idea of the character and then you begin making that character fit whatever needs the story has.
I mean, what I knew immediately was that there were going to be children who caught on fire, right? Like that was my thing. And I wanted them, but I knew that they couldn't do much in the story because they would be too busy bursting into flames, right? So I needed someone, and that's who takes care of them. So it was Lillian. And really, very quickly, I knew that who would you get to take care of fire children? It would be someone who doesn't have many options. And once you know that, you can just start building the narrative, right? Okay, well, why doesn't she have many options? And I wanted her to have had the possibility of options earlier, right? Like she had a chance and missed it. And so that might make her interested in this possibility. And then you just keep building and building. And I lived with Lillian in my head for a long time. And honestly, it's just one of those things, like the way Lillian talks and her thought process is very similar to mine. Like her voice is really closely connected to me. She's not me, right? She's a different character. But once I found her voice and I was like, oh, you can be kind of profane. It's not an authorial voice. I could just let her talk. And as she kept talking and telling the story, all this other stuff started to build around her. Mm-hmm. And it was really easy for me to figure it out. I connected almost immediately with Lillian. And I knew that it's the first book, like I said, that's first person. And it's because I knew she could do stuff I couldn't. And I was really grateful that I'd figured her out.
So did you begin this book? That's true. I hadn't thought about that. That's the first two novels are in third person, mm-hmm. And then third person multi voices, right? It's not just yeah. And this one, it's just her. And I'm wondering, so did you begin it thinking that way? Like, oh, this is going to be my first person novel? You did. Okay.
Yeah. And it's weird because I wrote the book really fast, but in these preparatory little moments, I had written a prologue, and it was much darker, sadder. The kids were adults, and it was this like moment where they find Lillian, who's now an old lady, and then they're going to look back on the past. And I wrote it, and I was like, I don't know if this works. And so then I was like, well, let me write the flashback of how she ended up taking care of them. And the voice immediately became profane and sarcastic and fun. I was like, oh, get rid of all that stuff. Like, I just want the book to have that kind of immediate lightness and sarcasm. And you talked about, like, do you think about the books that you wrote before? And I really do. I really loved writing Perfect Little World, and I'm proud of it. But it was in some ways a much more earnest book and difficult to write because it had so many characters. It was 10 years of temporal distance to write about. Yeah. And it was just hard. And it ended up being a 500-page book about babies. And I had to cut it down to a 350. It was just a very difficult book that I really wanted to write about people who were inherently good, like just kind people trying their best. And I liked writing it, but I don't think I'm very good about writing inherently good people because I'm not, you know? And so everything about this book was a reaction to how difficult that book had been. I was like, not 20 characters, not 30 characters, 4 characters, right? And I was like, and it's not going to be 10 years. It's going to be one summer. And I'm not going to move around anywhere. It's going to be one space, and it's going to be a short book because I'm not going to write a 500-page book and have to cut it down. I'm going to make it a 250-page book. And so everything about the book immediately was, I'm going to have a different experience so that it works the way that I need it to work.
Yeah, and it seems genius that way, right? It's super, except for the opening, I guess it's a prologue. I don't think of it as a prologue, but it begins before the actual story, and that's basically how Madison and Lillian became friends, and then are. But then everything else is really just that summer. Like the most they move, if I remember this right, is they spend a lot of time in like it's not a bunkhouse, cabana.
Yeah.
And then they go to the library once.
Yeah.
That's kind of it. That's just that's super charming, in part because you talked about Lillian's voice. It's profane, but it's also like she's sort of gleeful in places. Like when that's why I read those passages about the kids. She's like, holy shit, you have these kids? Really? They do these things? And then she becomes really attached to the kids, but also kind of feels like she's their advocate and in her own profane way. And I think that's really gratifying for the reader, because you're like, wow, all right, so this person is actually taking responsibility for kids and no one else wants to take responsibility for them.
Yeah. I mean, that's it. It's the way that I always work, is to try to start light. And then hopefully if I kind of tamp down those expectations, there's some silliness, I can do some things later, right? I can get maybe a little charge that I couldn't get otherwise. And that was Lillian realizing that, like, oh, I'm in this, and once you're in it, you care.
Yeah. And she's got other things going on. She plays basketball.
Yeah.
And she's been betrayed by Madison before the rising action of the story. So all this complicates it. But I was going to ask you about this. So one of Kevin's teachers was this great writer named Paget Powell, who I've heard him quote his teacher, Donald Barthelme, where he says, "What must wacky modes do? They must break our hearts." And so that seems to be one of the abiding principles of your fiction. Does that seem fair to you?
Yeah, it's that I mean, and I think about that because of Paget's calling it wacky modes. I like wackiness. I like silliness and lightness. I'm just not going to be the kind of person that's like, here I am, I'm going to sit down and write the great American novel. I don't care about that stuff. I'm like, I want to write about kids on fire, but their hair looks beautiful even after they And so that's all I care about. Like, I don't even really have much beyond that. It's just like, what happens if kids burst into flames? And so that wackiness, eventually, if it doesn't adhere to anything, nothing happens, right? Nothing matters. And to my mind, the closer and closer you get to weirdness and wackiness, the more it seeps into you, and it makes you care, right? If it works right, you start to love it. You love that weird, broken, messed up thing.
Yeah. That's how I feel too. Yeah, that seems exactly right. And this is something I hadn't thought of about your work until I reread this book for this, is that there's a lot in your fiction about class. I know seems like a weird, like sort of like on from high way to talk about it, but almost everyone in your stories in some ways is on the margins. This is true in Family Fang too, where, the kids are like part of this weird family experiment. The parents are, using them as props, and then their lives haven't really worked out. Even the sister, who's become a successful actress, that's kind of crapped out. And I'm wondering if this is something you're conscious of, or this is just a kind of like aesthetic appreciation of the underdog.
I think it's more like, how do you get tension in narrative? Well, you start to remove options, right? When you narrow the options, when you place constraints, you get combustion, to my mind. And so a lot of times my constraints are family, a location, setting, geography, and class, right? Like because it's not necessarily about characters who are poor or on the margins. It's that even if you're poor and on the margins, it doesn't mean that you don't have to navigate all these other social spaces. So the weirdness and combustion comes from when those things clash, when they come into contact with each other. So like just in Family Fang, like what if you're a world-renowned artist, but you live in the middle of nowhere and you have no real money, right? You've never really been successful. So like, how do you walk in all those different spaces? What does it mean to have, like Buster, to have written an award-winning novel, but also like be completely broke and completely
Yeah.
without any options, and to my mind, that's generally where conflict and tension come from, is when you realize you don't have many other choices but to do the thing that you don't want to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And you and I talked about this a long time ago. There's that great scene in Family Fang where Buster's there doing an assignment for like, it's whatever your version of Details magazine. I forgot what exactly it is. And he runs with these guys who they're shooting each other with potato guns. And he's just immediately fixated. And I love that moment because of course you would be. Like, if your life hasn't worked out, like, and these fucking yahoos are shooting each other with potato guns, you're going to be fully on board. And then you'll pay the price.
Yeah. And again, even that's a scene where it's like, this guy who's grown up with performance artist parents is going to watch these Iraqi war veterans who make potato guns, and he's just walking into a space he has no understanding of, and he gets shot in the face. So like, that's just what happens,
And that's also related to a story in your first collection about people who professionally get shot in the face.
Yeah, I write a lot about getting, it's weird. Like, I write a lot, there's like recurring themes, and it's getting shot in the face or stabbed in the back of the head. Those are huge fears.
And fire.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You said something, I'm interested what you said about this. This is in the Q&A thing in the back of the book, which I had never read it before. I was thinking about this, and you say that art can't change the world, but it can help you survive it. So that seems refreshingly reasonable to me. And do you ever get impatient with people talking about art saving the world? I'm just wondering where that came from.
Well, I mean, I especially think in the aftermath of the election, right? Of more than 4 years ago now, there was this talk of like all the great art that would come in response to the situation, and I couldn't really understand that or figure that out. And I also am really suspicious of art that's trying to like affect change, although it can, right? There are certainly works that have done that. But that's putting a lot of pressure on art, I think, and I think it's putting an unfair burden on art when there are so many structures that really actually need to be in charge of making change. So for me, like writing, just my own writing, why I like writing is to survive. I'm writing my way to figure out how to keep living, right? How to not fall beneath the surface. And writing, as I write, I'm writing my way towards that little sliver of an opening. I'm like, oh, this is how you stay alive. And that's what reading was for me as a kid, right? Books were the way that I was like, oh, this is how you keep going. Like this is, and so I don't think that they necessarily change the world, but I think they can help you navigate it and survive it and find out all these little manuals for surviving. And to my mind, that's pretty important and pretty lovely,
That's a lot.
Yeah.
Just to do that seems like a miracle, right? I get impatient with it. The idea that, well, it puts this, as you say, it puts this pressure on it, but it also makes us think, well, if art doesn't change the world, then it's failed in some way, where it could do these other things. It can entertain you. It can produce a kind of amnesia. It can ameliorate something. Like it can do all this other really cool stuff, even if it doesn't end up changing larger things. Like you say, like there should be other things. Or, easily do that. They don't, but they can. So I was thinking about this book in context of other books. Would you have any other in mind when you were working on this? Like, do you have any favorites? So in some ways it's fully an adult literary novel, but in some ways it feels like a classic sort of like teenager adventure story, even though they never leave the cabana except to go to the library. And I was wondering if you had any models, any favorites?
Yeah, one of the things like it's interesting, but like I started thinking about some of my favorite novels, and they're short. I just hadn't really thought about it, but like maybe my two favorite books are Shirley Jackson's "We Have Always Lived in the Castle" and "A Member of the Wedding" by Carson McCullers. And in both of those, you have these women, these girls, Mary Cat's 18, but with these kind of wonderful voices. Do you know what I mean? And they're kind of like, they kind of move through the world in this really interesting way. They're super weird. And so, and in both of those books, like the characters are constrained a little by geography. Like Maricat and Constance never really leave the Blackwood estate. They'll go to one of them goes to the village. And then in A Member of the Wedding, she leaves her home, where her dad lives, and kind of wanders through this small town. And that's when all the weirdness and strangeness and badness happens. And she needs to get back to that home space. Yeah. And in both of those books, to my mind, the main characters are children, younger people. And I like that. I like that kind of the weirdness and innocence of them. So those books really spoke to me. And for some reason, I just read a lot of short novels when I was writing the book. Mm-hmm. And one of them was Rachel Ingalls' Mrs. Caliban. Yeah, I love that. Which book. I was immediately like, oh, this is beautiful. This is wonderful. And again, it's about these kind of constrained spaces creating combustion. And the other was Sarah Levine's Treasure Island, ! Which is one of the most amazing books that I've ever read.
Me too.
And it was huge for me. And then the others are just anything that Marcy Dermansky writes, like Bad Marie. I love her work too, because it's very similar, right? Characters walking right into the bad thing.
I don't know that right. What's her name?
Marcy Dermansky. It's called Bad Marie.
Okay.
There's a lot of similarities with this book and that book, I would say. She's one of my big writers that I love.
Those four books are just, that makes total sense with your book. They're four of my favorites, though. They're short, but they sort of launch right into the premise. They have narrators who you pay attention to. They're kind of in danger. At least 3 out of the 4 are. Yeah. Have you ever read I Captured the Castle by Dodie Smith?
No, and people keep telling me to, and I don't know why I'm resistant. It's not that I'm resistant. It's just it's hard sometimes to reach back when there's these other things I'm trying to read, but yeah. I really should.
It's great, but I'm the same way. Like the more people recommend something, the more I'm like, I'm not going to fucking read that. We only have one more minute. So before people ask questions, what are you working on next? It sounds like you're well into something.
Yeah. So I have a novel due in November and I'm going to get it done. The pandemic, me being with my kids 24/7 has made it more difficult. It's similar in some ways to this book. It takes place over a single summer. It's in the mid-90s. It's a young woman, but it's different in that she meets this boy who's new to the town, and over the summer they make a poster that has this phrase I've talked about before that I say almost every day. The edge is a shanty town filled with gold seekers. We are fugitives, and the law is skinny with hunger for us. It's this thing that I've been saying since I was in my 20s. And so she writes this phrase on a poster, and it creates this huge national panic because no one knows who's made it. And so the whole book is about this one summer where they make this thing that creates chaos, her and this boy. And so it's similar in some ways to the book, but it's a lot more about friendship. Mm-hmm. What does it mean to be connected to these people who you're not genetically connected to, that you don't even romantically connect with, but they transform you? And then what does it mean to make art? Like, what's your responsibility once you've made a thing? And I'm always interested in that. So
2 follow-up questions real quick. Is it first person or third person?
It's first person.
From her point of view?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what's your terrible provisional title?
It's the title is "The Edge is a Shanty Town Filled with Gold Seekers." No, I'm just kidding. It's called "We Are Fugitives." We Are Fugitives. Yeah, so stay tuned for what the actual title will be.
I can't wait. I would pay so much money if it were that long run-on sentence.
Yeah, I would too.
All right, so we got questions here, and Amy, I'm just going to click on them unless you want to. The first, this is not relevant to you, is High Is Their Music. So I'm going to go from the bottom and go back. So one of them, someone asked a question. Yeah, can you talk about Lillian's mom?
Yeah.
That's the question. So maybe you could talk a little bit, and I have some questions too about her.
Yeah, so my editor over A Perfect Little World and this book was Zach Wagman, who I loved and was so great. I loved working with him on these two books, and he helped shape them in great ways. But one of the things with Lillian's mom, I wrote the book really fast, but I'd been thinking about it so much that it kind of cohered in a nice way. Like the edits weren't like Perfect Little World. And there was the mother, Lillian's mom. He was like, the one thing is, he's like, do you want to go back into this book and give her some depth and some complexity and maybe a little more sensitivity? And I was like, not really, like, I don't know. Like, I'm really suspicious of parents, like, I think like children are perfect. I just think children are innocent and wonderful. And for as long as they live, they're blameless to me because they didn't ask to be born. But the minute you make a person, you're a cop, and you did this to someone else, you brought them in. And so I'm just deeply suspicious of parents. But the larger thing is like, like I lived in, where I grew up in Winchester, Tennessee, in the Valley. And my parents were just so lovely, even though I was so strange. And they took me to the hospital when I needed to go, and they drove me an hour for therapy, and like they kept me alive. They really just through sheer tyranny of will took care of me. And so I think I write a lot because like my one thing that I always wonder about is what does it mean if you didn't have a parent who took care of you? Like I just can't imagine it, and it's terrifying to me. So Lillian's mom is that. Like what would happen if you were ruined and nobody was there to help you? So I made her kind of, and in my head, I have a story for why, and I feel sensitive towards her and I'm sympathetic, but I don't think sometimes children see their parents that way. They don't understand the nuance or weirdness. You're just like, that's who you were and that's what you did to me. Yeah. And here's where we are.
Yeah, that's just so when your editor asked you that, so you didn't then change her. You didn't make her a bigger part. Okay, that's really interesting because she seems, and she's not really in the book that much, but when she's there, she commands a lot of attention.
And I mean, she's she was beautiful. Her life did not work out either. Like I can imagine, like you have possibilities, it doesn't work out. You have a kid that you're raising on your own. You get angry, you get bitter, and it's hard to take care of somebody else. So that was all I needed for me,
That great moment when Lillian takes the job and she just leaves and doesn't actually tell her mom where she's going, although she's an adult by that point. So why should she? But it feels pretty pointed to me. I really like that a lot. All right, the questions here. Lillian's mom. Thank you. This is a comment from Lisa Blanchard. Thank you for letting women play basketball. Do you play?
I love basketball more than any sport in the world. It's one of my favorite things since I was a little kid, and I love Dominique Wilkins and with the Atlanta Hawks. But so, and I do play, but my boys, I have a goal set to 6 feet so the boys can shoot on it. So I pretend like I'm Patrick Ewing. I just do post moves on them all day long and hit these turnaround hook shots. But the thing with the reason I wanted these characters to play basketball was that so when growing up in where I grew up in Tennessee in the 90s, I mean the greatest team that I ever saw, it was the Tennessee Lady Vols basketball team, Pat Summitt. And you had all these just incredible players, Shamiqua Holdsclaw, and watching them was like the closest to transcendence I'd felt. And they were winning because nobody else in Tennessee was winning. But I also lived in Winchester in Franklin County, but the county over, Grundy, which is a very different, much more rural, much more poverty-stricken county, had this one player, Kim Woodley, when I was in high school, and she was still to this day the best basketball player I've ever watched in person. She was just incredible. She was just so good and effortless. And I would go to Grundy County to watch, in this gym where I was not wanted. to watch her play. And I remembered there was a woman, Latina Davis from Franklin County, who went to play for the UT Vols. And I was like, that's the best thing that could ever happen to you. Mm-hmm. And I watched the women on the Franklin County basketball team. And what I was so jealous of was how deeply assured they seemed of themselves, because they were so good at this thing and they were a team, right? So any space they navigated, they were together. And I really wanted that. You know, I was so lonely and so anxious. I wanted that kind of experience to where you trusted that your body would do the thing that you knew it could do.
Yeah.
So I wanted to write about that feeling of where basketball becomes this thing where you just know that you're good at it, right? And it's muscle memory at a point, and it feels like you're alive when you do it.
I'm trying to think, is there a basketball novel? I can think of 100 baseball ones and a couple football ones, but
I mean, Rabbit Run.
Rabbit, right? Yeah.
I don't know. I'm trying to think of that, but I mean, it's one of those sports where it's just, to my mind, it's just the best sport to watch. Do you know what I mean? The movement of it and the way you ride waves, it's just such a great sport to watch.
Well, we're done tonight. I'm going to watch the Jazz play the Lakers, which I'm psyched for.
That will be awesome. Yeah.
I know. All right. So more here. You've been asked, can you disclose who will be in the movie adaptation? So I think this person's asking about, this is Karen, asking about the new book, the current book, the one we're talking about, has been bought and then it's being made, right?
Yeah. I mean, they have a director and a screenplay and it's moving forward. I don't know, I really stay out of it. I don't know much, and I don't think anything, I don't think they've cast it yet, but I'm hopeful that they will. And it will be fun. I can't, it's hard to picture who they might be, but I'm excited to see what happens.
Were you involved at all with the Family Fang adaptation, or?
So Nicole Kidman optioned it, and so I went to meet her because she lives near Nashville, and I was like, I'll give it to you for free. And then my agent heard and said, don't do that. And, but she said, would you like to write the screenplay? And I was like, I've never done that. I don't know how to do that. I'd hate to be the person that kept this from happening. And so they got David Lindsay Abaire, who's a Pulitzer Prize winning playwright, to do it. I was like, that was the right choice. Yeah. And I remember when I wrote Perfect Little World, my agent for movies and TV was like, you should write a screenplay. I was like, I don't know how to do that. And he's like, if you can write fiction, you can write a screenplay. And so I wrote one, and he was like, oh, maybe people can. Maybe it doesn't transfer. And so I've never tried again. I don't ever think of fiction as the thing, as like a step to the thing that's next. I don't want to do anything other than write the book, so this is what makes me happy.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I've been asked to do that too with my own. I'm like, one, it seems hard. I have a hard enough time.
It's impossible.
I have a hard enough time writing the thing I think I'm here to do, let alone to take on this whole new thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, a couple more questions. Can you talk about how working on a new novel during a pandemic may or may not be affecting your writing process?
It's affecting it in that I'm not writing, because my children are with me 24/7. But honestly, I mean, I write maybe 2 months out of the year. I just don't write every day or every week, partly just because, my primary thing is right now is being a dad, and my kids, they need me. And it's hard to say oh, I can't do that because I've got to go write this book, because there's so many immediate things I need to take care of. So I just write in my head, and so I'm rarely at my computer writing. So the pandemic has made it harder only in that separation mentally, because my son is almost always against my arm, if we watch wrestling or we do something. So it's been harder to fully imagine that world, because it's always immediately touching up against the real world. But it's not that much different, honestly, for me, because I just don't write that much. I know it will come, and I know I can do it. So I just let it come when my kids and my family will let it.
It sounds like when you actually, this has been true for maybe all your books, when you can write, you really write. Like you sit down and you just do it. You just sort of tear through it.
Yeah, because I've been writing it in my head for 2 years. I've kind of memorized the first few pages of the book, like the line by line. I know the chapters. So when I sit down, it's just super fast, because I've just been trying. I hold it in my head so long that it starts to warp and twist and pickle. And that's when I know when I can't hold it in my head any longer, I've got to sit down and write it. And then I do. And then we see what happens.
So I was reading something today about Kazuo Ishiguro has a new novel out. I'm not sure if you like him or not.
Yes, I do.
I'm a big fan. And he talks about the same thing. He actually puts it up like, even more prosaically. He's like, I just don't really feel like I need to write for much of my time. And then when I get around to it, I get around to it. And then when he does that, he really writes.
Yeah.
Sure he's like doing things in his head like you're talking about. But, you get that other thing like I have to write every day, that kind of like workman like way of thinking about writing, and you're just saying no. That's not the way I work.
I can't do it. And writing is the thing that makes me happy. And I'm lucky enough that I can still treat it that way, right? As the thing that is the reward for everything else,
Yeah. All right. So I think we have one more here. So is seeing the kids spontaneously combust as a metaphor for their anger too simple? I think I'm reading that right.
I don't think so. I mean, I think that's it. Like with our kids, children seem combustible to me when you're out in public and they haven't eaten, and you've got to get them somewhere in the next 30 minutes, but you're stuck in this line and you can watch them. And my son, who deals with anxiety, he's 13 now. He used to have night terrors. He used to wake up and his ears were burning red. I mean, we would have to put him in an ice cold shower, and it felt like he would combust. And I knew like I couldn't physically make him better. All I could do was just stand next to him. And that's really all he wants. You can't put out the fire. You just say like, oh, I'll be next to you if you burn, I'm not going to leave. So it felt perfectly reasonable to me that it makes sense to me that people could burst into flames always. And I think it's anger, anxiety, the combustion of the constraints that the world places upon us makes you feel like that. And it's also just like disability too. It's just like anything, like, because I deal with mental illness, bursting into flames makes sense to me. Like you have to navigate how you take care of other people and how you deal with other people. And that's sometimes bursting into flames.
And what I really like about the way you treat that, so on one hand, that's, this sort of heavy personal, but also like medical stuff. But on the other hand, what you talked about earlier is like, when you were a kid, you're like, holy shit, people can burst into flames. This is a thing. So on the one hand, it's like, it's half like the heaviness of being a parent and watching a child struggle and be in pain. And the other hand, with this pure like fascination, like, wow, people can do that? That's just
I know.
Awesome. I miss them. Maybe I'm not tuned into them, but I miss those kind of shows when I was a kid at least, where you could like, yeah, there's something about someone who can catch on fire. It's a kind of the Guinness Book thing.
Yeah.
Hey, there's the person who can shove 75 cigarettes in his mouth.
Yeah, it's when conspiracy and weirdness was like safer maybe than it is now. It was all you cared about was like, is there a Mothman? That was like the extent of it.
Yeah, right. Like the amount of hours I spent thinking about Sasquatch.
Yeah.
That I can't count them.
Yeah.
And they were well spent too. Yeah, I think we're out of time, Kevin.
I think they asked for one more. Was there something she said, ask about the...
Oh, you can read this too. Yeah. Audio. Do you select the performers to read the audio versions?
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, I listen to audiobooks constantly, partly because I'm with my kids, we go on walks, but they'll send me like 4 possibilities, and they're like, we can't guarantee that that's the person, but do you like any of these? Like, who jumps out? And for this one, they gave me this actress and audiobook narrator, Marin Ireland, who I had seen, and she's in Sneaky Pete and she was in Homeland, but she also had a part in Family Fang. Loved her work, and she's done some Tennessee Williams plays in New York, and I love Tennessee Williams. So immediately when I heard her voice, I was like, oh my God, I would kill if she would do it. And I've not listened to audiobooks of my own books before, but my son Griff was like, "Can we read it?" And I was like, "I don't want to read it to you. That would be weird, but maybe we'll listen to it." So every night we would get in bed and listen to Marin Ireland read the book. And she made the book so much better, like Griff really responded to it because of how she read it, how good she was at it. I thought she was incredible.
That's awesome. And you're getting a lot of comments that she's awesome.
She is. She was the best. I mean, she won the award for best female narration this year. And it's weird because Southern accents are really tricky because it can be so corn-pone. You know what I mean? Like you can lean so hard on the Southern accent where really it's not like that. And so the variations between Madison and Lillian, the way that she handles that Southern accent is really brilliant, incredible.
Yeah, because their voices are different too. I wasn't thinking about them in terms of accent, but their voices are different anyways. So yeah, that would make sense. All right. I think, here we are.
I just say, like, it's so lovely that Harbor Springs invited me and let us do this. And the other thing is just, Brock, like, you are one of my favorite writers in the whole world. And so it just makes me so happy to get to talk to you during this pandemic, when the last time I saw you was in Miami in November of 2019.
I was just thinking about that, right? So we were at another book festival, a lesser one, Amy. Yeah. But it was still great. We went to see have oysters, and then just the world crapped out. So this has been great. And I love this book. I love your, Harbor Springs is great. So thank you, Amy, for that.
I'm so grateful, Amy. Thank you.
And thank you to everyone.
Yeah.
All right.